So with that, thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm Stephanie Cronin. I'm the Executive Director of the Middlesex 3 Coalition. We are a public-private partnership, a regional economic development organization. We include 10 municipalities and about 140 of the larger businesses, the educational institutions, the real estate stakeholders in the region. And our role is to work together as a coalition to improve economic and business development in the region. We're fortunate today to have Undersecretary Mark Fuller, the Undersecretary of Business Growth at the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, as our moderator. And I know, Mark, I don't see you yet, but I know he was asked to step in last minute for Secretary Mike Keneally, who I've got to say has been doing a remarkable job leading our business community through the numerous challenges that we're facing. So I thank him. I thank the entire Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. I know we have a few team members on this webinar. So thank you for all your work, your transparency, your information. The office has been great. Special thank you to my friend Peter Milano, who's always just a phone call away. So thank you to Secretary, Undersecretary Fuller for moderating us. Thank you to our panel. We had a prep call this week. It's clear that this panel has a vast knowledge of the region, the industries. I look forward to hearing from the panel and the moderator on real estate development in the second half of 2020. So our panel includes Demetrius Spanias, President of Land and Sea Real Estate, Brent Mogul, President of Mogul Architects, and Michael Dalton, the Executive Director at Cushman & Wakefield. Thank you all for joining us. I look forward to hearing from you all. Before I do that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Kaplan of the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I'm sorry, Rick Kaplan of New England Real Estate Journal. Sorry, I'm still looking for my moderator.
I thought I got a promotion.
There you are, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I had a little trouble getting in, but I'm here. So, Rick, no need for the coup.
I knew that by the time I finished talking, you would be there. So I had faith. You guys are always there when we need you.
Okay.
So, Rick, take it away.
You ready for me?
I'm ready.
Well, I'm Rick Kaplan, and I'm from the New England Real Estate Journal. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. These webinars have been going fantastic the last couple of times, and I hope everyone is enjoying them. I want to thank all our sponsors for helping us put these together. Reamer and Bronstein, this is our corporate sponsors. Reamer and Bronstein, BSC Group, Mogul Architects, National Grid vendor sponsors, Erlin Construction, EBI Consulting, and US Pavement. And now I want to introduce our moderator, who is Undersecretary Fuller, and Mark Fuller, who has served in the past 3 years as the Chief of Staff at the MBTA, where he assisted in accelerating an $8 billion capital investment program in the core system, including new cars, signal upgrades, and infrastructure enhancements to improve reliability for customers. Fuller also helped put the MBTA on path to fiscal stability, closing a $400 million operating budget deficit, and adopting technology to improve customer experience. Before joining the MBTA, Fuller served as Director of Performance Management for the Office of Governor of Massachusetts. Mark Fuller currently serves as the Undersecretary of Business Growth at Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development at Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I present to you Mark Fuller.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for that kind introduction. What I thought I might do is offer just a few opening remarks on the reopening process, and then shift pretty quickly here to our panelists with some good Q&A and back and forth. So maybe just to set the stage for a moment on where we are as a state, it's important to remember that as we navigate COVID-19, Massachusetts was in fact and is in fact one of the hardest hit states. Depending on which metrics you look at, we're sort of probably third behind New York and New Jersey, which means that our reopening process and our phased approach is happening slightly later than other geographies. And on April 28th, the governor announced the formation of the Reopening Advisory Board. That board was chaired by Lieutenant Governor Polito and Secretary Keneally, who I'm happy to pinch it for here today, and included lots of representatives from the business community, public health officials, and municipal leaders. And they spent a really intensive 3 weeks pulling together a reopening plan for Massachusetts that was published on Monday, May 18th. And it lays out a 4-phase strategy for responsibly and safely reopening businesses here in Massachusetts. And I'd really urge everyone to go on to the state website, mass.gov/reopening. There are a lot of resources there for the business community. The plan is there, walking people through the different phases, and a lot of good resources that captures the thinking. And that report and plan was really based on the input of a bunch of stakeholders, 75 different industry groups, community groups, labor organizations. Those folks represent about over 100,000 businesses and more than 2 million workers across the Commonwealth. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how to appropriately and safely reopen. We looked at how other states were handling the challenge, did a lot of benchmarking against other geographies, but most importantly, public health data really informed our thinking about how to reactivate the economy as safely as possible. And public health indicators are going to continue to really drive our thinking around when and if it's appropriate to move between phases and how we think about reopening generally, and the guidance, the type of guidance we'd like to give to businesses as they think about reopening safely. The state publishes every day an updated public health indicator dashboard that gives everyone a sense of where we stand as a state. It has things like testing capacity, healthcare system readiness, the number of patients with COVID-19 in hospital. So if you are interested on sort of a daily update on where we're trending, that's published every day and is pretty easily accessible to everyone. We are currently in phase 1, and each phase is going to last a minimum of 3 weeks and could last longer, again, depending on those public health criteria. And we started issuing guidance for anticipating a phase 2. And on Monday, this past Monday, June 1st, the governor issued an executive order that detailed the lists of businesses and which activities would fall in phases 2, 3, and 4. So if you're active in the business community and want to get a sense of where your business might fall, again, please go to that website. And there's a button in there that says, when can my business reopen? And it's a pretty comprehensive list of, if you're a retail shop, what phase you fall in, what type of restrictions you might need to be aware of. And that executive order also allows people to start heading back into their businesses ahead of phase 2 to sort of get ready and prepare. We're trying to give the business community just as much time as possible to get their operations in order so that when they do reopen, they can reopen safely. We have fielded a lot of questions about when a phase 2 might start. We're currently targeting this Saturday, so the 6th, to sort of announce a date for phase 2. And again, all of that is driven by the public health metrics and indicators that I referenced a second ago. And then finally, I would ask everyone to go onto the website. We've been issuing a lot of general business guidance, workplace safety standards, sector-specific guidance for organizations like retail or general office buildings, restaurants, that sort of thing. There are COVID control plan templates there. There's an attestation process. There's lots of information for both employers and workers. So as everyone does reopen, we can do it just as safely as possible. And we are monitoring those data points all the time. I did want to make sure we talked a little bit about housing and real estate before we jumped into the panel. Hard to believe that on March 4th, we had filed a $240 million economic development bond bill. Clearly that that was filed sort of directly before the COVID crisis hit. And a huge part of that work was housing choice. And I know last year in October, Secretary Keneally was out here with Stephanie Cronin and Lowell talking about the housing crisis and talking about critical changes we would really like to see made so it would be easier for folks like some of our panelists on this call to create more housing across Massachusetts. That economic development bond bill had a very extensive housing component to it and remains a priority. But clearly we recognize the world is in a different place than it was since early March. So we're sort of evaluating how to carry that forward under the current circumstances. But housing and the housing crisis and the housing choice initiative is still very much top of mind for all of us as we think about what the state needs to do to be competitive. And the last thing, I'm obligated to say this, and I say this every time I talk to anyone, it's really incumbent upon all of us to work together to defeat COVID-19, and that really, and to move between the phases, we all need to cover our hands. We need to cover our faces, rather. We need to wash our hands. We need to try to stay socially distant where we can. It's incumbent upon all of us to be vigilant for symptoms and, of course, stay home if you feel sick. This really requires the community to come together. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of background in how we're thinking about the phasing and reopening. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today about how this has impacted our communities. And maybe with that, I just ask our three panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe we could have Demetrius, then Brent, and then Michael, and we'll get into some back and forth in Q&A.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you, Stephanie and Aaron, for organizing this, and welcome all of the participants. So my name is Demetrius Spinaeus. I am the broker, owner, and president of Land and Sea Real Estate, which I co-own with my wife, Joanne Caljanis Spinaeus. We're a boutique brokerage based in Andover, but we work regionally and nationally. We focus on both residential and commercial, with a particular focus on developers and investors. We do a lot of multifamily development, single-family home sales, single-family home development, everything from office and industrial sales as well. So kind of all, but with a primarily focus on development, and also focusing on investors, both locally, nationally, and internationally.
So I guess I'm next. This is Brent Margle. I'm the founder and president of Margle Architects. We're at two locations, one in Harvard, Mass., one in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we work in the multifamily housing segment, although we've got a very diverse portfolio, which includes hospitals, healthcare, recreational facilities, life sciences. Very fortunate to have worked across all sectors. And we're seeing a lot of change coming about that we're happy to be here to talk about and give some advice from those we've listened to through this pandemic. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Michael Dalton, and I work for Cushman & Wakefield, which is a 52,000 employee global real estate firm. We do all different things in all different places across the globe. I specifically work with occupants and owners of real estate more north of the city along the Middlesex 3 coalition districts. I've been in this business since 1987. I've had the fortune of starting right in the crash of 1987. I've seen a further crash in the dot-com boom, and now and started a business in 2008 in another crash, and but this one certainly is a whopper, and I look forward to chatting with everybody today. One other thing I just want to compliment everybody on this call, but especially a lot of our public servants and Mark, your office, and Secretary Keneally and the governor's office. It's been inspirational to see everybody kind of rise to meet this challenge, and your leadership has been, I don't know what our Commonwealth would do without you guys. So thank you for everything you guys do.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and Thank you all for being here and serving on the panel and allowing me to jump in here at the end. So if I butcher the Q&A, we can all just agree that I'm a poor substitute for Secretary Keneally. So maybe with that, I will we'll start with a couple of questions. And one thing that's become pretty clear is we're seeing vastly different things happening between the commercial side of the house and residential developments. And I'm curious to get the reaction of the group on how the pandemic is impacting the housing market versus the commercial market. And maybe Demetrius or Michael, you could offer some thoughts there to get us started.
Mike, do you want to start, or would you like me to?
Why don't you start, Demetrius, and I'll fill in.
Okay, so maybe we'll do it this way. I'll talk a little bit about the housing, what I'm seeing in housing, and maybe we can flip over to you and you can talk about what you're seeing in commercial. So how's it impacting it? Well, in general, if we're talking, I'll start with single family home sales. I'm noticing that the market has not slowed down insofar as single family home sales go. In fact, there's less and less inventory and more buyers. In fact, I read a metric this morning that for example, in Andover, there is 48% less inventory as opposed to this time last year. Sellers in general, I believe, are reticent to sell because of financial reasons. I don't know that they might have concerns about the home sitting on the market, but what I'm noticing is that there's so many buyers coming out. In fact, there are more buyers coming out. About a year ago, I think the metric was 16 buyers per every property that was on the market, and now it's considerably more than that. The buyers are coming out. So I am seeing that. I am seeing we're starting to get calls from people who want to move further and further to the suburbs. So I think that's a very important aspect of it. Insofar as multifamily goes, and doing multifamily development, what I am noticing insofar as COVID-related effects are dealing primarily with delays in zoning or planning board meetings, getting approvals, things like that. But I do notice that projects are moving forward. And I think, Brett and I were chatting about this. I think some of the concerns are going to eventually be how these new buildings are going to be designed, and if there's going to be any type of effect on that. Insofar as amenities goes, distances of hallways, distances, how many people to a room. I do still believe that the multifamily market is extremely strong and will continue to be very strong. But I'm also thinking that, Boston has so many deliverables coming in the next couple of years that it's still not going to come anywhere near to filling the need. But I think the need is going to keep pushing further and out into the suburbs. So that's what I'm seeing as far as the housing market goes. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. I think in the office, industrial, and life science market, there's really three things that are going on right now, and I'll start with the two what we see as positive opportunities and reactions to the pandemic. Industrial sector, and I think it was referenced before on an earlier call, is companies that are looking to secure supply chains, relating to, and this goes back 3 years now, how do they protect and secure supply chains going forward to manage inventory and stay and continue to compete with revenue, is going to be beneficial and has been beneficial here in the Commonwealth and in the United States in general. So you're seeing a larger demand for that. On the warehouse side, here in Massachusetts, from the logistics piece with retailers, Amazon, Home Depot, even everybody who's switching and going to a retail, from a retail physical hardscape environment to now a virtual environment, is been a boom for the area. I think I heard Bob Buckley talk a little bit about a project in Billerica that is being undertaken by Home. I probably can't say, but that kind of inventory of real estate that's been kind of sat fallow for years is now the epicenter demand for groups like that. And I think going forward, that's going to be an opportunity for our Commonwealth and also for markets that have not really succeeded in the past 15 to 20 years. Life science is huge. Our company, and specifically up north, is there are actively 4 to 5 groups that are seeking space immediately that are going to align with the needs of our life science industry, whether it's medical devices, whether it's pharma, or research. That's all stuff that's going on right now. And I think will bode well for the North. And in Cambridge, certainly Massachusetts life science world with the hospitals, the universities, and the talent are going to lead us out of this and out of anything. Massachusetts is going to be, well ahead of the balance of the country based on just, even just that. Lastly, the office piece, and I think that's a little bit more of a concern, is trying to find that bottom. People are unsure about, going back to work. And until people in our government figures that out, and I think everybody's doing the best that they possibly can, people don't know. I think, Mark, your perspective on I think the MBTA is going to play a huge role on giving people solid ground about getting back into the city. And then, until that time, we are seeing a lot of people consider and explore, can I have a satellite office? Can I do something else in the suburbs? Because I think people are thinking of going back to work. How do I ride up in an elevator? How do I get into my big office building? How do I take the train in the morning? So I think there's going to be a period of time where, in some of our winters where we've had epic snow events and the difficulty with the MBTA, I think our traffic is going to be, when that comes back, is going to be a challenge. So it'll be interesting to see once we find that bottom where people end up. So,
I want to throw one thing in there as well. Thanks, Mike. I just want to mention that one thing I think we've seen in the industry about, and this has been a COVID-related benefit, is moving things to more of a virtual world online insofar as the sale of real estate and the investment of real estate. We're seeing that more and more. I know internationally, for years, a lot of clients would come to me, from other countries and looking to purchase real estate, but they're seeing things online, and they're even, some countries and some companies have platforms where they're purchasing real estate online. And I think that a lot of the brokerages, especially in Massachusetts, have done great insofar as rising to the challenge and creating virtual tours and such. And so this has been working great for single family homes, but I'm also seeing how it's working in, for even larger projects and larger developments, people just purchasing things and not even visiting the properties until the due diligence period, because they don't need to, because the virtual tours are so good.
I think you both just picked up on something which we're doing a lot of thinking about very actively, which is to Michael's point, what are those key enablers? Transportation is certainly one of them. And I know Secretary Pollock and the whole team over at the MBTA are working very hard to think about how COVID-19 impacts their capacity, how they think about crowding, how they think about cleaning and disinfecting. I'd also put childcare, in that group as a key enabler, and that feeds directly into schools too, up and down the chain from childcare for young folks all the way to K through 12 and education more broadly. So some critical enablers and a very tricky set of challenges we're all trying to work through together. Well, speaking a little bit about talent and student housing, I want to pick up, Demetrius, maybe on something you mentioned in passing, which is, how do you think the pandemic impact will touch student housing and logistics around multiple family housing developments? Do you think we're going to start to see people incorporate social distancing requirements, either because a municipality requires it or just because it's the appropriate thing to do now? How do you think that might play through?
I think it's going to be, thank you. I think it's going to be tricky. I mean, you do have in some of these cities a huge student population. I'm looking, for example, Lowell, which we do a lot of work in. And so now you have the concept of dorms, and then you also have private companies where student housing has been a very big thing. I've had a lot of student housing clients, looking at all these college towns, looking to develop and partner with universities or do something private and cater to students, in which case they're basically still creating a dorm situation of 3 or 4 beds per unit. And of course, hand in hand with that was the whole trend of micro-living, which were micro lofts, which was a big thing starting to happen in Boston. Again, you might have basically a dorm for adults, which was all the amenities in the building. And so, the question is are those developments now going to kind of be derailed? And I think in Brent, can probably jump into this. I think he's probably more apt to do so than I am, is that to talk about, well, how is design going to change now? If you're taking a multifamily, it's like, well, how do you change the corridors? How do you change the amenities? What's the parking going to be? Are you still going to be able to have roof deck access? You can have a roof deck, for communities. What are the common areas going to be? And I think that's going to be a big issue. And if Brent wants to jump in on that.
Thanks, Demetrius. A lot of things are going to happen, I think, and some of them might even involve changing of zoning ordinances or changing of building codes as relating to how do we make our buildings safe. If you go way back, we made buildings that were safe against fire. We made buildings that are safe against the elements. And now we're talking about how do we make our buildings safe for people against viruses. And the first question that comes to my mind is, well, how long is this fear about the virus going to maintain? Because if we get very reactionary now and do a whole lot of things to be virus free, and the concern of the general public concern wanes in 2 years, then what have we accomplished? My answer is, I think we will still accomplish a lot, because some of the benefits and some of the changes that might be very disruptive to multifamily housing or hospitals or office spaces might be a wise thing to do regardless of the virus, because of other health conditions and because of quality of life issues like we've all heard stories from friends and relatives about realizing, geez, I got an extra 3.5 hours in my day that I got to spend with my kids or doing some hobbies and things which I never afforded to do otherwise. When it's back to a dormitory situation or a public housing situation, I think codes need to change. Designers need to change their way of thinking about giving more space to separation. Probably dwelling units, for example, will have to have an in-house office that we've never done before. We've devoted spaces in residences to dining areas that nobody uses, and those might be converted to in-home offices kinds of things. But multifamily housing and dormitories will be affected in terms of some specifics. For example, elevators, you might have to double up in elevators and have skip stop elevators, wider corridors, of course, operable windows to allow fresh air, and mechanical systems will have to be beefed up to almost like you're building a clean room to live and work in. So there's going to be some dramatic change, but my summary, I guess, is that it'll all be for the good. Things need to change. Disruption doesn't have to be a bad thing.
No, and I think right, you hit it right. You hit it right. Is that the design is going to be very interesting, and as some of these buildings get developed or redeveloped, for example, and just the concept of how do we make these more user friendly? Do you take is this the end of the 3 or 4 bedroom sense? Does everything have to be 1 or 2 bedrooms? In which case, what's going to be now the minimum size of these units? And I think that's going to be a big thing that a lot of municipalities are going to be dealing with if they're done with multifamilies. What's your minimum size of unit? Well, can you do 750 square feet for a unit where half of the units can be less than that? Like, well, okay, now you're starting to cramp people in just for numbers rather than for safety. How's that going to change? All right.
Yep, I agree.
Pretty profound implications, particularly potentially in the medium and long term. And maybe sort of speaking to that, curious to understand what people are seeing and hearing from downtown Boston and Cambridge as companies start to look to reconfigure their offices. Are they increasing or decreasing space, that type of thing? Or are we actually going to see some of that relocation or multiple different offices or expanded footprints. Maybe Brent, you could offer a couple insights
Yeah.
there, and Michael, that might fall neatly into your camp as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So obviously, we've done a lot of talking with people about what the future holds in the next quarter, the rest of the year in these demographics and trends. And I think the summary of it, I know we've got a lot of questions to get through, so I'll try to be brief about this, is that in the downtown office space, we anticipate that the square footage per person in an office suite will have to increase from approximately 150 square feet per person to 250 square feet per person. So how does one do that? Well, you take the areas that are currently used for gatherings, which shouldn't be used for gatherings now, and you spread people out into those spaces. The other component, though, that balances this all out, which I think it might make things work, is that we anticipate 20 to 30% of the people that used to go into an office space will work remotely, if not full-time, at least part-time. So that decreases the pressure and the demand on the number of people in an office space. On top of that, we anticipate that companies will have multiple locations in the future in terms of, you've got, like I mentioned, life sciences before, you've got to have people where the money is in Cambridge for life sciences, but the manufacturing could and probably should be in the suburbs to balance out expenditures and quality of life, and of course the distancing issues. So in a nutshell, everything you mentioned is going to happen, and it's a matter of to what degree and what popularity it is with the end users, the employees of these companies.
Right. Michael, is that what you're sort of starting to see as well? And some of those trends might have even predated COVID.
Yes.
Sounds about right.
If ever, to just echo Brett's comments are that the downtown, as I mentioned before, still is uncertain. Number one, companies, tenants, occupiers have a freeze on capital now and likely into next year. So in order to undertake a kind of even a study, forget about an execution on a plan to redeploy or reconfigure space, it requires a ton of capital. How that works, we don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. To Brent's point about more square footage per space, we'd agree. But companies are trying to look at cutting costs, preserving capital, and unfortunately, what that means for downtown in the short term is that there's going to be less people down here. So that means there's less people going to restaurants or delis or all those different things. So that's a huge, forget about the office market, but I think that's a macroeconomic shock that we haven't processed yet. And so until we find a real bottom and a direction and some kind of clarity or a good guess directionally, I think people are going to be doing a lot of comparing and exercising. Certainly myself and Brent and Demetrius are going to help customers, clients kind of go through that process. What comes of it, I can't say we can predict it just yet. It's definitely going to change, definitely going to change. I think it's probably going to increase demand in the suburbs, but who knows? One of the big questions, and I want to leap back to the housing issue and education is really a lot of our collective world, I think, is going to be determined on what the governor's office and when everybody mutually decides that it's safe to send our kids back to school, back to college, back to, I think everyone on this panel right now, as well as everybody listening, probably has someone at home or some child at home that really, for the first time in their lives, wants to really go to school. And I think that will all give us, as parents, as business leaders, and some comfort, and just even that sense of direction would be a compelling reason to kind of take down our fear factor and add some real meat to a direction of what we're doing here. So,
Mike, that's a great point. I might chime in here that in sort of a humorous manner, there's many that have discovered they would like to work from home. College students, not on that list. they, they don't want to miss that college experience, nor should they.
Yeah.
That's a more difficult challenge.
Picking up maybe on that, key enabler topic around childcare and education, Michael, maybe you can talk a little bit about the future of traffic and public transportation and its impact on commercial real estate. I think it probably picks up on some of the themes you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think the one, if you kind of look back at the past 10 years of success that Boston has had, Cambridge has had, and regionally, our success and our ability to grow our macro economy based on a key engine in Boston and Cambridge has been the T. 100% of the orientation of the T has been focused directionally inbound at a certain point in the day to accommodate traffic and people going into the city. That's basically the reason that you've seen office buildings be able to charge more rent, because you can put more people into office space downtown, because you have a simple and easy ability to get people to work in the public transportation sector. If you kind of now walk that forward with the fear of, hey, I don't know if I can go to work, or it's a very real and limiting challenge to the success of downtown. And in turn, it might actually bubble up into opportunity for the suburbs. It might just be a rebalancing, and a real challenge. How do we get that our, not the T, or not the governor's office, but basically our entire Commonwealth? How do we reorient our transportation plan going forward that might rebalance thing at trying to mitigate the exposure to one side versus the other? That's going to be a challenge. Big picture wise, I'd love to see the federal government invest some money longer term that hasn't been done in 50, 60 years into figuring out across our country how to improve that. That's an opportunity and money well spent that would benefit both the cities and the suburbs, even rural communities. So.
If I can chime in here for a second, I think that what Mike is saying is absolutely right. I also think that as commuters go in less and less, or maybe only 1 or 2 days a week, I still think that the importance of transit-oriented developments is still going to be huge. Any town that's on the MBTA that have developments near that, so people can actually, when they have to go into work, they still have the access to go into work on the MBTA. But if not, they can stay at home. But they have the choice. Like, I know some officers are going to be probably doing, okay, you come in on Monday and Wednesday, you come in on Thursday and Friday, and we do it that way. So I still think the access to downtown has to be incredibly important, regardless of whether you're living there or you have a satellite office, as Michael was suggesting.
Yeah, it may be a case that actually the T in the near term might rebalance its loads whereas 90% of the orientation was inbound traffic during the morning, maybe now it's a little bit more balanced at 50-50. So, because there might be people that live in the city, and there absolutely are, that might be looking at commuting to the suburbs in the near term.
So as part of that too, I think these transit-oriented developments, we're going to be creating more of the need for mixed use, more so in these things. And again, leading to Brett's comment about rezoning, I think that's important, where you might have these stops in the suburbs that might just be purely commercial, purely residential, but they might be a mix now of office, retail, and residential, just to have these little business centers that are not overcrowded and that give city offices a chance to have a satellite.
Picking up on that theme, obviously the state is on the call. I'm here with my colleagues, but we also have a number of municipalities who are on the webinar here. Maybe we can start with Demetrius, but would be curious if Michael and Brent also had thoughts on suggestions, ideas, best practices that you're seeing around the state or around the country that municipalities and even the Commonwealth as a whole could think about incorporating based on this experience and thinking into the future around economic development and real estate development more broadly.
I think that the most important thing is to allow more residential development. I think it's important. I think there's such a housing crisis, And if there is, I don't think there's going to be a mass exodus from Boston, but there will be an exodus. And I think that there's nowhere to put these people. One of the biggest issues in the last 10 years in housing has been the fact that there are no starter homes anymore because they're too expensive to build. The builders and developers don't make their profit margin on this. They have to build $1 million homes just so they can actually make a profit on it, and that's been a problem. And no land for development. And so I think land for development has to be released, and I think that the regulations have to be lessened so you give builders a chance to do that, both multifamily and single family, because it's just such a lack of this. And some of these towns, again, any of these towns that are on the commuter rail might be at this point be expecting a crush of potential new residents, and I think they have to be prepared for that.
I mean, certainly, we're acutely aware of the housing crisis in our economic development bond bill. That it is called a housing crisis, and the housing choice bill is a huge part of that. Or are there other things maybe on the commercial or industrial manufacturing side that cities and towns should be thinking about?
Yes, I would say the one thing that we would view as opportunistic for a city or a town that has had slugged it out for 20, 30 years since the days of digital equipment and Apollo Computer had leapt into the suburbs and changed the landscape in those economies, is that cities and towns actually embrace a little bit more of the new logistics in remote retail environment. If there are projects that have been fallow for a long, long time, it may be opportunistic for a city or a town in terms of providing very good wage-paying jobs, new tax bases, new excise tax opportunities, new relevance and vibrancy to an economy by looking at land or an existing building and let it change into something that is more distribution or manufacturing. I think there's very little existing inventory of space like that, and I think cities and towns might be smart to consider, hey, we've slugged it out for this many years, and this project is sort of work, but maybe if there's a new metric that would work to accommodate industrial or distribution, might make it better. Rents for office space out in the suburbs are actually on a net basis almost equivalent to what they are for high-end brand new industrial space. So that would directly relate into tax revenue for cities and towns too.
Mike, we actually had a call this last week from a client who's in an acquisition mode of Class B properties in the suburbs, thinking that to repurpose those from general office space to either what we call blue space, which is hyper healthy in work environments, or to change that from general office space to an industrial distribution facility. So that's already happening on the ground, and we see that as part of what's going to change. I would like to step back to the housing component just real quickly and suggest that there's, at least in this firm, and I think in some other thought-leading firms around the country, vertical housing is going to be something that should be considered by local zoning. Everybody's afraid of tall buildings, but when you look at the payoffs for them and how it allows for other compensating amenities like green spaces around a vertical building, allowing, because of less ground area taken up by a vertical structure, allowing for mixed uses and amenity-rich communities to develop around commuter rail stations. That's a key. I have a son that lives outside Chicago, and they've done a masterful job of clustering mixed-use developments, primarily anchored by multifamily housing projects at T stations. And what a very, very vibrant and successful communities based on the transportation system. So it's a recipe, we all know that, but I keep going back to this pandemic is like a kick in the rear to say, hey, we could do better. So I'm hoping that's one of the end results of this.
Right. And Brent, you were just basically running with what I mentioned before about the transit-oriented districts, about building that mixed-use, multifamily
Exactly.
centers, right. Absolutely.
Exactly.
I completely agree with you. And the idea of the rezoning as well, as you just mentioning,
Yeah, well, it won't happen without rezoning. But you know
Right.
what? Most towns and communities are, very, very advanced in this kind of thinking about what's best for the general public. So it will happen over time.
Well, I know we've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we can end on sort of an optimistic or positive note here, and curious to hear from all of you on this. Are investors still investing in development projects? What's getting people excited? Sort of what types of industries and markets? And where should we be looking for? Not to fall back on green shoots, or where should we be looking for optimistic parts of all of this that might come out of it, sort of across your different experiences?
Well, I'll start on that. I mean, if I were an investor right now, I would be looking into housing in the suburbs, and particularly I would probably try to scoop up as many small single family homes as possible, because I think that's where the next strongest rent base is going to be. It's going to be the apartments. They're going to have that, but there are going to be a lot of families who are going to be looking for small single family homes with access to work. That, I think, is going to be a very, very big thing. I still am very bullish on multifamily. I think downtown apartments in any of the city communities are still an incredible thing to invest in. I think it's very important. I also believe that other industries like medical buildings. I have a lot of clients who have been progressively more and more interested in medical buildings. I think those are still very, very strong. Any of those types of investments, I think, are going to be great at this point. And I think, maybe, Michael can speak to this as well a little bit, is, where the financial institutions are looking and where they're more comfortable for lending on. But I know that what I've just spoken on, the assets I've just spoken on, I know are quite strong. And that's where I would go if I were an investor right now.
Yeah, we have seen vigorous interest in investment opportunities in Cambridge and in Boston, on the life science side and even the office side. And everybody, but I think even though we've taken a couple of torpedoes midships here, I will tell you, Boston and Massachusetts as a whole are sound, very, very sound, well led, and the resiliency of what we can do and what we've done before and what we'll do going forward shocks me. I mean, think of this. Can anyone on this panel or in the audience imagine 6 months ago that everyone would be in a virtual conference and making do and making progress here? And I think we are. And so that's going to bode well for our recovery. It's going to bode well for, the investment community. There is no land in Massachusetts. Everything started out as an appraiser in my career, and land value is the core of what is, makes real estate and makes opportunity, and there's none left. So I think as a communities look at it, the state looks at it, and we as people in the industry have to look at it, is just kind of cherish that and steward that in a way that's economically feasible, that is beneficial to our society, and it's sustainable going forward. That's the resiliency, and that's also the opportunity to invest going forward. So I'm incredibly bullish about our future. There might be some changes along the way, but that's okay. That's what we do. So
Yeah, I got to add on to that, Mike. You hit it right on the head, because the people in your firms, our firms, have been resilient. They've adapted this new way of working remotely seamlessly, and I'm just so excited to know that we kind of got forced out of the nest in this, right? we would have been here in 5 years, but now we've been forced into doing this, and everybody accomplished it very well. I'll tell you one quick story. One of our clients has suggested, I asked him what his plans were, what his feelings were about the next 2 quarters, and his phrase was, well, I've kept my powder dry and I'm ready to go. But he basically felt that it was going to take a societal elimination of the fear that people have about the virus before great movement will occur. So I think, and that's human nature. When we stop worrying about our health and feel reasonably comfortable that we'll be okay, then we will find this new chapter in commercial real estate in the greater Boston area. Looking forward to it, actually.
But I think you're right. We have to, to echo what Mark asked in the first place, is that ending optimistically. I'm extremely optimistic. I hope I've kind of relayed that as well during this. And I see a very strong market. I see a very strong commercial market. I see a very strong residential market. So will things shift? Yeah, but I think everything's going to be just fine and better maybe once we figure out how to navigate it.
But my sense is that, before COVID and even frankly during, when we go out and talk to businesses, we go interact with various sectors, it's hard to find a state who wouldn't trade their place for ours. We've got such a talented workforce. We have such strong communities. We have an incredible amount of assets and really stable leadership sort of across the board. And generally speaking, if you look back historically across recessions, Massachusetts has fared relatively well compared to its peers. But I would just say it's incredible how much talent is here, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the word, and that always is going to be a tailwind. And that's certainly something that we continue to hear even through this really challenging time. And it has been incredibly challenging for so many members of our community. And I do really hope that we can navigate our way through this and get back to a place where people feel like they can operate as safely as possible, given all the different, given how the nature of COVID and how it works. And I know we're very much committed to trying to see that through and working hand in hand with our public health officials to make sure that as we try to progress and reopen in a way that is just as safe as we can possibly make it. Obviously, nothing is risk-free in this type of environment, but we are trying to be just as thoughtful as we can to balance out the public health considerations and the economic impact across the board and across the Commonwealth.
Could I jump in for just a second here? And first, I want to thank everyone, the panelist moderator, for a very informative, rich discussion. I appreciate everyone's insights. I got a lot out of it, so thank you. And I could listen to you for 2 hours. But I was wondering if maybe we could just take an additional few minutes, if it's okay. I don't know what your time frame is like. And see if there are any questions that our attendees might have. Would that be okay with our panel and moderator?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll ask our attendees, if you're out there, to either write your questions in the Q&A, the chat, or just raise your hand and we'll open up the lines and then you can ask your question directly. So maybe we can spend just a few minutes and I'll throw it out and see if anybody has any questions for that. And in the meantime, Rick, do you want to chime in?
Want me to ask questions?
I've got one, go for it.
I think there might be a couple of questions in the chat. Did you check that?
I do have a question from Eric Salerno from the town of Tingsboro, who's asking about assisted living and independent living developments, how they've been impacted, and has their role in the pandemic slowed down things or created opportunities?
So I'd like to comment on that. We do some work with Genesis Assisted Care Company, and in fact have designed a large facility that is not under construction yet. And we're anticipating a phone ringing really soon to say, hey, we've got to change the design because of this virus. And in fact, I believe that is one of the areas that will warrant total rethinking elder care facilities as a result of the pandemic really have to be rethought. So I anticipate that many of these facilities will slow until we figure out what the best new edition of elder care should be and will be.
Yeah, to echo your thing, Brent, that we're in the middle of a couple projects to secure some ground for senior housing and really something that involves memory care, long-term care, and assisted living. I think those projects actually are very needed in our economy, and one of the challenges I think that's we've seen in this environment is the age of the nursing homes that we have and their complete lack of capacity to react from a physical plant perspective to this challenge. So I think actually you're going to see our the need and the upgrade, at least capital wise, to the existing facilities and new facilities. And I actually hope ultimately the government can play a role in that, at least financially supporting or backstopping some of those opportunities. So they're well needed. I mean, my mother is in a facility that's actually fortunately very well run and very secure, and they've been very successful. But I have had other friends of my parents that have been in other facilities, and just due to their age and how tight they are, it's a challenge to make to understand how anyone could feel comfortable placing a parent in a facility like that going forward. So that's a need and an opportunity.
Well, actually, if I could jump in for a second, and I'll throw this out to both of you guys. I mean, not just with senior housing or assisted living, but also with the whole idea of multifamily and housing in general. I mean, are we talking maybe a quality of life revolution about how these spaces need to be rethought, how the living spaces for the individual, for their own, not only for their own safety, but for their own sense of being needs to be rethought. What might be the minimum size of these units? How would these facilities work? What would the amenities be? How now in an assisted living facility will it become more like a home rather than a hospital? I mean, will there be a new revolution of this in architecture and in development?
Answer is yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's coming.
Thank you. And we have one hand raised, so I'm going to maybe we can wrap it up with our last question from Bob Buckley from Reber and Bronstein. So we'll open up the line so Bob can ask the question. Go ahead, Bob, you can talk. Or I will just read his question. How's that? With unemployment so high, how do you think it'll play a role at the landlords in the investor market? As a lender, the deferrals haven't been outrageous, but our thoughts are that it'll increase as tenants are still unemployed and landlord liquidity dries up.
I'll take a crack at that. It's a great question, Bob. Right now, our we constantly watch statistics and also announce the list of layoffs. No layoffs are positive. Office industrial wise though, in our marketplace, we have seen most of the adjustments to our economy happen in the retail world, the hospitality sector, and in restaurants. So that has been a massive disruption, and certainly landlords that hold leases with occupants like that, either on a long-term, short-term, near-term, whatever you want to call it, there's got to be some recycling. And the question comes is how quickly can those restaurants get back to some kind of revenue production, using the good stewardship of what's reasonable and what's practical and safe. That's going to be a struggle, a huge struggle. On the office side and the industrial side, again, office-wide, we've seen more layoffs. We have seen some layoffs on the lab side, some, but not many, and very limited, if anything, on the industrial side. So with office tenants, you know, if we started to see, and we have seen some, but started to see massive amounts of layoffs, yeah, that's going to suggest that there's some more adjustments coming and some concern. But right now, it's retail, hospitality, and restaurants. So.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a great place for us to end. And so I want to thank our panel, Demetrius, Brent, Michael, Mark. Thank you all for joining us. I think it's been a great discussion. Also, we want to thank our sponsors. Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you to thank our sponsors as well.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, panel. You always do a great job putting these together. Everyone had great information. I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some new concepts for elderly housing, because I'm getting very close to that. So I appreciate knowing that. I want to thank our corporate sponsors, Reamer and Bronstein, BSC Group, Mogul Architects, our vendor sponsors, National Grid, Erling Construction, EBI Consulting, and US Pavement. I want to thank them all for helping us put this together.